The city woke up slowly under a curtain of rain. Manhattan's streets glistened like rivers of broken glass, yellow taxis slicing through puddles, horns echoing in the gray dawn, the kind of morning where umbrellas bloomed like dark flowers and everyone walked faster, as if the rain itself were an inconvenience rather than a miracle. Earl Jenkins sat behind the steering wheel of his number 72 bus, the heater humming weakly and the wipers struggling to keep up. 58 years old, face lined by decades of dawn shifts and diesel fumes, he drove like he lived, steady, cautious, and invisible. The city didn't notice him anymore, but he noticed everything. The faces that changed with the seasons, the regulars who disappeared without goodbye, the silent ones who never looked up from their phones. At precisely 7:14 a.m., as always, she appeared. Maya Thompson waited at the same corner every morning. Rain or shine, her wheelchair splashed with mud, her hoodie too thin for the cold. The rims of her wheels were worn smooth, and her shoes, one untied, were 2 sizes too big. She never waved for the bus. She just sat there, patient and still, watching the traffic with eyes that seemed far too old for 14. Earl pulled up close to the curb, careful not to drench her with the rainwater pooling by the tires. He pressed the hydraulic lever, lowering the ramp with a mechanical sigh. "Morning, Miss Maya," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble softened by familiarity. "Morning, Mr. Jenkins," she replied, her voice quiet but clear. He watched her guide her chair up the ramp with practiced precision, the wheels squeaking faintly. Once aboard, she moved to her usual spot, the corner seat behind the driver near the window. She pulled out her battered tablet. Its screen cracked in one corner and immediately began typing, fingers flying faster than most adults could think. Earl glanced at her reflection in the rearview mirror. She was always doing that, typing, calculating, scribbling notes in a half-torn notebook. Once he'd caught a glimpse of the screen. It wasn't social media or games. It was rows of numbers, strange symbols, and code that looked like gibberish to him. "Still building that spaceship of yours?" he teased one morning months ago. "Not a spaceship," she'd said with a small smile. "Just trying to make something smarter than me." Now, as the bus crawled through traffic past the glittering towers of Midtown, Maya's reflection flickered against the window, her face illuminated by the tablet's soft glow, the rain painting streaks across the glass like silent tears. Outside, executives in $1,000 suits sipped coffee and barked into phones. Inside, a paralyzed girl in a wheelchair quietly built worlds in her mind that no one would ever see. A man in a soaked trench coat bumped past her without so much as a glance. A group of students laughed loudly a few seats back, oblivious to her presence. Maya didn't react. She had learned long ago how to disappear. But Earl saw her. He always did. At the next red light, he turned slightly in his seat, eyes meeting hers in the mirror. "You keep at it, kid," he said softly. "One day someone's going to notice what's in that head of yours." Maya didn't look up from her tablet, but the corners of her mouth curved into the faintest smile. The light turned green. The bus rumbled forward, carrying its forgotten passenger past the glass towers that would one day remember her name. The meeting. The rain had stopped by the time Earl's shift ended, leaving the streets slick and shining under the silver glow of the morning sun. The sky above Manhattan had the sharp, cold brilliance of a blade, the kind that cut through the illusion of safety. Earl parked his bus at the depot, leaning back in his seat with a groan that came from somewhere deep in his bones. The radio on the dashboard buzzed with a muffled voice calling for an emergency fill-in. A driver out sick. A corporate shuttle left stranded. "Route?" he asked into the radio. "Helios Capital. Midtown to the financial district." "Pick up in 10, Earl rubbed his temple. Helios Capital, and the name alone smelled like money. He'd seen their glass tower every morning on Maya's route, with the golden H gleaming high above the city. He almost said no. He was tired, his back ached, and the last thing he wanted was to play chauffeur for Wall Street millionaires. But then he thought of Maya, of how she'd smiled that morning when he told her someone would notice her one day. He thought of her determination, of how she refused to let the world's indifference define her. "Copy that," he said finally. "I'll take it." By 9:02 a.m., Earl was sitting in the driver's seat of a gleaming black Helios shuttle, the kind with tinted windows and leather seats. The parking lot smelled faintly of rain and arrogance. Men in suits poured out of the building, clutching phones and lattes, shouting words that didn't sound human. derivatives, margins, projected losses. One of them, a tall man with silver-streaked hair, and the kind of confidence that came from never being told no, barked, "We're already late for the acquisition briefing. Let's move." Earl nodded silently, opening the door. The man was Daniel Cross, CEO of Helios Capital, a name whispered with both awe and fear in the finance world. Beside him strode Claire Monroe, the firm's CFO, younger, quieter, but with eyes sharp enough to cut through steel. As they loaded in, Earl noticed a small figure across the street, Maya. Her wheelchair splashed through a puddle as she tried to cross, tablet balanced in her lap, the wind tugging at her hood. Without thinking, he waved. "Maya, over here!" She blinked, startled, then wheeled toward him as the executives inside began to protest. "Excuse me," Daniel snapped. "We don't have time for—" "She's with me," Earl interrupted calmly. "She just needs a ride." Bus stops flooded. Claire looked up from her phone, her gaze softening as she saw the drenched, trembling girl. "Let her in," she said quietly. Daniel rolled his eyes but didn't argue. "Fine, just don't make us late." Maya maneuvered up the ramp, breathless, clutching her tablet like a lifeline. "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins," she whispered. He smiled. "Don't thank me yet, kid. We're heading into the lion's den." The ride to the financial district was silent except for the sound of raindrops sliding down the windows. The city was waking up in all its brutal beauty. The street vendors shouting, the smell of roasted nuts and exhaust. The towering glass reflecting 1,000 ambitions. Maya sat near the back, quietly watching the executives argue over projections displayed on a laptop screen. She couldn't help but lean closer, her eyes darting across the numbers. It was instinctual, her mind breaking down the patterns, catching inconsistencies, seeing the story hidden behind the data. They spoke in rapid-fire jargon, IPO lockups, patent extensions, post-merger cost structures. None of it was meant for a child. But Maya wasn't just any child, something didn't add up. The decimal placement was wrong. The compound interest curve was misaligned by a single digit, small enough to miss, big enough to destroy. Her fingers twitched around the tablet. She typed quickly, recreating what she saw, her breath quickening as the math unfolded in her head. A cold realization crept through her. If those numbers were real, Helios Capital wasn't gaining $4 billion. They were about to lose nearly a fifth of it. Her chest tightened. She looked up, meeting Claire Monroe's eyes for just a heartbeat through the reflection in the glass. Claire turned away, too busy arguing with Daniel to notice. Maya's voice stayed trapped in her throat. Who would believe her? A paralyzed girl on a corporate bus. The shuttle turned onto Wall Street, the skyscrapers rising like gods around them. Maya felt small, soaked and invisible again, but the truth burned in her mind, impossible to ignore. As the building came into view, she whispered to herself, "They're wrong. Their numbers are wrong." Earl heard the whisper but said nothing. He glanced back at her in the mirror, her eyes glowing with quiet intensity. Something deep inside him stirred, the same instinct that made him pick her up that morning. He didn't know it yet, but this ride would change everything, because by noon, that quiet, forgotten girl would do what no billionaire in that tower could. She would save $788 million and unravel the biggest lie Helios Capital had ever told. The collision of worlds. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime that sounded far too gentle for what awaited inside. The Helios Capital boardroom gleamed like a temple of power, glass walls stretching toward the skyline, sunlight bouncing off polished steel and marble. The table itself was a single slab of black stone, cold and smooth, the kind that reflected faces like a mirror. To Maya, it looked like another planet. Her wheelchair rolled silently across the marble floor, its small rubber tires squeaking faintly against the gloss. She tried to make herself small, her hood half drawn, her tablet clutched against her chest. The air smelled of money, expensive perfume, imported coffee and ambition. Earl walked beside her, pushing a catering cart stacked with coffee trays, pastries, and folders. The temporary driver turned makeshift assistant. The executives barely noticed either of them. In this room, people like Maya and Earl existed only as service, background noise in the opera of power. Daniel Cross stood near the head of the table, his posture flawless, his hair silver at the temples. He was the kind of man who never seemed to blink, eyes sharp, predatory, assessing everything around him. His voice filled the room like a command. "Ladies and gentlemen, the Titan Biotech acquisition is the deal of the decade," he declared, gesturing toward the massive screen on the wall. $4.2 billion, 12 subsidiaries, 3 global patents. This is how Helios becomes untouchable. Applause followed, polite, mechanical, rehearsed. Maya flinched at the sound. It wasn't real applause. It was the sound of people agreeing with power. Claire Monroe, seated halfway down the table, didn't clap. Her expression was unreadable, calm, professional, but her fingers tapped against her pen. Something about her eyes told Maya she was the only one in the room not fully convinced. Daniel clicked a button, and the financial projections filled the screen, cascading lines, glowing figures, models scrolling so fast they blurred. "This, right here," he said, pointing to a chart of rising profits, "is our future. Titan's patented enzyme technology will double in value within 5 years. Maya's eyes locked onto the figures. She couldn't help it. Her brain did what it always did, looked for patterns, errors, inconsistencies. And within seconds she found one. At first it was just a flicker, a small mismatch in the asset depreciation rate. Then another. Then another. Her pulse quickened. The model was built wrong. A small miscalculation in the patent expiration date skewed the projection curve, doubling the valuation in error. It wasn't just a typo, it was systemic. Her stomach twisted. If Helios went through with this, they wouldn't be gaining billions. They'd be bleeding hundreds of millions, and no one in the room even noticed. Earl leaned down, whispering softly, "You okay, kid?" She nodded slowly, her breath uneven. "It's wrong," she whispered. "What is?" "The math. Their projections, it's all wrong." Earl frowned, unsure what to do, but something in her tone made him glance toward Daniel. The man was basking in his own speech, eyes glinting as he painted his billion-dollar dream. Maya's fingers twitched. She could fix it. She could prove it, but how? Who would listen to a paralyzed 14-year-old sitting beside the catering tray? She stared down at her tablet, heart pounding. Every instinct screamed for her to stay silent, to disappear the way she always had. But the thought of watching them destroy everything, of knowing she could stop it and didn't, that was worse. Claire spoke suddenly, cutting through Daniel's monologue. "Are these figures based on the extended patent model?" she asked. Daniel smiled, that tight political smile that hid teeth. "Yes, of course. We verified the projections internally." Maya felt her throat tighten. "That's the lie." Claire didn't press further, but the hesitation in her eyes was enough to ignite Maya's courage. She wheeled forward slightly, the faint creak of metal breaking the silence. Dozens of heads turned. Her voice trembled, barely audible. "Excuse me." The room froze. Daniel turned slowly, as if he couldn't quite believe the interruption. His tone was soft, condescending. "I'm sorry, who are you?" Maya swallowed hard. "I'm Maya, I was just helping with the coffee." But laughter rippled around the table. Someone muttered, "Cute." Another whispered, "This should be good." Earl took a half step closer to her, eyes flashing protectively. "Let her speak," he said, voice firm. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "And why would we take financial advice from a child?" "Because," Maya said quietly, "your model's wrong." The laughter died instantly. Daniel's smirk faltered. Claire looked up sharply. Maya continued, voice shaking but steady. "You calculated the residual patent value using the 2032 extension clause. But Titan's enzyme patent expires in 2027 because it's a cross-license with Biogenics. The curve you're projecting after year 7 doesn't exist. You're valuing a product you won't own." Her words hit the room like a thunderclap. For a moment no one breathed. Then Daniel laughed, the hollow kind of laugh that hides fear. "That's absurd." But Claire was already typing furiously into her laptop. Her eyes darted across the screen. Then her breath caught. She looked up. "She's right." The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. Maya's chest rose and fell, her trembling hands still gripping her tablet. Earl stood behind her, pride swelling in his chest. Around the table, the titans of finance, men who'd built empires and crushed competitors, sat in stunned disbelief, undone by a girl the world had ignored. Daniel Cross's jaw tightened. Behind his eyes, the mask began to crack, Outside, thunder rumbled again, as if the storm had only been waiting for this moment to return. And inside the glass walls of Helios Capital, one truth had shattered a billion-dollar illusion, spoken not by a CEO or a board member, but by a forgotten child in a wheelchair. The collision of worlds had begun. The unseen voice. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The silence inside the Helios boardroom was a living thing, tense, electric, almost breathing. The rain outside tapped faintly against the massive windows, the city humming far below, oblivious to the war about to begin. Daniel Cross's smile had vanished. His jaw clenched and the veins in his neck pulsed with a quiet fury. He had built his empire on confidence, dominance, and control. And now, in front of his entire board, that control had slipped through his fingers because of her. A child. A paralyzed, rain-soaked girl in a wheelchair. He stepped closer, his polished shoes clicking against the marble, his shadow swallowing her small figure. "What did you say your name was again?" he asked, his voice dripping with false calm. "Maya," she whispered. Her voice was steady, though her heart was slamming against her ribs. "Maya Thompson." "Well, Maya," Daniel said softly, kneeling just enough to look her in the eye. "You're very confident, but you're wrong. Our legal team verified Titan's patents last week." He turned to Claire, expecting her agreement, but she didn't look at him. She was still typing, her expression tightening with every keystroke. After several seconds, she spoke, quietly, but clearly. "No, Daniel. She's right. The biogenics clause does shorten Titan's exclusivity window. The algorithm isn't accounting for it. Our valuation curve drops by 19% after year 7. The air cracked. Every face around the table shifted. Awe, disbelief, fear. Numbers never lied, and Claire Monroe's voice carried the weight of truth. Daniel straightened abruptly, the color draining from his face. "That's impossible." "It's not," Claire replied. "The data's public. Anyone could have caught it, if they'd looked." Her words weren't aimed at him. They were aimed at the mirror-polished arrogance that had filled the room. Maya lowered her gaze. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edges of her wheelchair. She hadn't meant to embarrass anyone, she had only wanted to stop a mistake. But the looks she saw around her now were not of gratitude. They were anger. Daniel's voice hardened. "This is absurd. You expect me to believe that a street kid just walked into my meeting and rewrote a billion-dollar projection?" Earl's voice boomed across the room before Maya could answer. "You don't have to believe it, pal. You just have to look at the numbers. She did your job for you." A few board members chuckled nervously. Others shifted in their seats, avoiding eye contact. Daniel's nostrils flared. "Who are you?" he snapped at Earl. "You're not even staff." "Bus driver," Earl said simply, crossing his arms. "But even I know when a kid's telling the truth." Laughter rippled again, and not at Earl but at Daniel. It was subtle, but Daniel heard it. The sound of power slipping, the kind that destroys men like him. His mask cracked fully now. "Enough," he barked. "Get her out of here." The command hit Maya like a slap. Security at the door hesitated. They looked unsure, glancing toward Claire, who still hadn't moved. Claire stood, slowly, calmly. "No one's going anywhere." Her voice was low, controlled, but carried more authority than Daniel's roar ever could. She walked around the table until she was standing beside Maya. "You were brave to speak up," she said softly. "Do you still have your data model?" Maya nodded and held out her tablet. Claire took it, connected it to the projection system, and the screen came alive again. Rows of numbers and formulas cascading like rainfall. The boardroom darkened as the lights dimmed automatically. And then, before everyone's eyes, Maya's corrected model took shape. The graph dipped. The losses materialized. The projections flattened. The truth glowed across the 20-foot screen, undeniable. No one breathed. Claire turned to Daniel. "You would have signed a $4.2 billion deal that cost us nearly $800 million. Because you didn't let anyone check your math." A single bead of sweat rolled down Daniel's temple. "You think this child is credible?" "She's right," Claire said, her tone sharpened by fury. "She's more credible than you right now." The whisper spread around the room like wildfire. Executives leaned toward one another, murmuring. Some were pale, others already imagining headlines. Daniel slammed his hand on the table. "This meeting is over." But no one stood. Earl placed a hand gently on Maya's shoulder. "You did good, kid," he said quietly. "Real good." She blinked back tears. For the first time in her life, someone had seen her. Not as a burden, not as a background figure, but as something rare. Something powerful. Daniel stormed out, his reflection disappearing into the dark glass. Claire remained still, eyes locked on the data. Then she turned back to Maya. "You didn't just save money," she said softly. "You saved reputations. Maybe even careers." Maya didn't answer. She didn't know how. Her hands were cold. Her pulse roared in her ears. But across the room, one of the older board members stood up, walked over, and extended a trembling hand. "Miss Thompson," he said respectfully, "you just saved Helios Capital." The words landed like thunder. Outside, lightning flashed again and the storm returning, the sky breaking open, and as the first raindrop splattered against the window, Earl looked down at the girl in the wheelchair, the forgotten passenger who had stopped a billion-dollar disaster, and whispered to himself, half in awe, half in disbelief, "Guess someone noticed after all." But neither of them knew what was coming next. Because for every truth spoken aloud, there's someone powerful enough and desperate enough to bury it. And Daniel Cross wasn't done yet. He was just getting started. Seconds to shock the world. The rain outside Helios Tower turned from drizzle to downpour, hammering against the windows like a warning no one wanted to hear. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Half the board still stared at the glowing graph on the projector, unable to process how their billion-dollar dream had just shattered because of a girl they had ignored minutes ago. Daniel Cross stood at the end of the table, his hands gripping the edge so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His mask of charm was gone. All that remained was the naked rage of a man whose empire had been questioned by a child. Maya sat quietly in her wheelchair, eyes fixed on her tablet. The air around her felt heavier than oxygen, the weight of every gaze pressing down on her. Earl hovered near the door, tense and ready to step in if anyone raised their voice at her. Claire Monroe stood between them, a line of calm drawn against the storm. Her poise never faltered, but her mind raced. She knew Daniel. He wasn't the type to admit defeat and humiliation like this. Men like him didn't forgive it. Daniel turned suddenly, his voice sharp as glass. "So this," he gestured toward Maya, "is what passes for financial genius now? A child with a cracked tablet and a savior complex?" No one spoke. "Tell me, Maya," he said, his tone a razor's edge wrapped in silk. "If you're so brilliant, how long did it take you to guess that number?" "I didn't guess," she said quietly. "Of course not." Daniel smiled, thin and cruel. "Then prove it." "Daniel," Claire warned, her tone cold. He ignored her. "If you're such a prodigy, let's test that big brain of yours. I'll give you a new problem. Right here. Right now. 1 minute." Gasps rippled through the room. "Daniel, this is absurd," one board member muttered. But Daniel only raised a hand. "She wants to play expert? Let's see it." He turned to the digital board behind him, his fingers flying over the keyboard.
"Here's a real model. One our senior analysts have spent weeks optimizing."
"You have 60 seconds, Maya. Correct it if you can." Claire stepped forward, furious. "You're humiliating a child." "Correction," Daniel said softly. "I'm testing a liar." Earl's blood boiled. "You'd better watch your tone, mister. Stay out of this," Daniel snapped. "This is between the prodigy and the professionals." All eyes turned to Maya. She sat frozen, rainwater still clinging to her hair, her hands trembling slightly over her tablet. But when she looked up, her eyes had changed. The fear was still there, but beneath it burned something sharper. "Resolve." She nodded once. "Show me the data." The entire room seemed to inhale at once. Daniel stepped back, the smugness returning to his lips. "Timer starts now." The digital clock on the wall blinked to life. 60 seconds, Maya's fingers flew. The silence in the room was deafening. The only sound was the furious tapping of her keys and the steady tick of the clock. Every second felt like a heartbeat. 55. She scanned the projection on the board. Complex models of depreciation, equity distributions, foreign tax credits, the kind of calculation that destroyed full-grown analysts. But Maya's brain worked differently. She didn't see numbers, and she saw patterns, invisible connections forming like constellations. 40 seconds. She spotted it. A recursion error buried deep inside the dataset. A function looping back to year 5 instead of projecting forward. One misplaced value, one missed line. The kind of mistake no one in the room could have caught without days of recalculating. Her breathing slowed. Her eyes flicked left then right. 25 seconds. She started rewriting. Her fingers blurred, the tablet screen glowing brighter. Earl stood motionless, jaw clenched, silently mouthing, "Come on, kid. You got this, 10 seconds. Daniel smirked. Almost out of time. Maya didn't look up. She hit one final key. The graph on the screen changed. Numbers realigned. The projection curve flattened, revealing the correct output. 0. The timer beeped. Silence. For a moment, no one spoke or moved. The numbers glowed across the massive screen, undeniable, perfect. Then Claire stepped forward, hands trembling slightly as she examined the display. "Good God," she whispered. She found the fault line. In under a minute, she turned toward the board. "That's the compounding algorithm error from the 2022 acquisition series. We couldn't locate it for weeks." Every face turned toward Maya. She sat still, exhausted but calm, her fingers resting in her lap. Daniel's expression curdled. He opened his mouth to speak, but one of the senior partners cut him off. "She's right," the man said hoarsely. "Every calculation checks out." And then the unthinkable happened. Applause, soft at first, hesitant, then louder. It wasn't the polite kind of applause executives gave after a presentation. It was real. It came from awe, from the recognition that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Claire's eyes glistened. She crouched beside Maya and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You just saved us again," she whispered. "You saved all of us." Earl exhaled, tears glimmering in his weathered eyes. "Told you, kid. One day they'd notice." Maya smiled faintly, not the smile of victory but of relief. Daniel Cross stood frozen at the head of the table, his power unraveling thread by thread. He forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Impressive," he said coldly. "Truly, but remember, little girl." He leaned closer, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "No one saves $1 billion without owing someone a debt." Maya's heart skipped a beat. His tone wasn't admiration. It was a warning. Claire noticed the look in Daniel's eyes. Dark, calculating, dangerous. Something twisted was brewing behind that calm exterior. As Maya and Earl began to leave the boardroom, a storm rolled back over Manhattan. The thunder cracked like a gunshot, and the rain hammered the glass once more. The headlines would soon read, "Teen Prodigy Saves Helios Capital from $788 million Mistake." But behind the scenes, a far greater story had already begun, because Daniel Cross wasn't planning to thank Maya. He was planning to erase her. The awakening. The morning after the meeting, the city of New York seemed to hum differently. The papers hit the streets before sunrise. By 7 a.m., her face was everywhere. Teen Prodigy Saves Helios Capital from billion-dollar blunder. Paralyzed girl exposes CEO's fatal mistake. The headlines blazed across kiosks, smartphones, and plasma screens inside subway stations. Maya Thompson, the invisible, girl who had spent years being ignored by strangers, on buses, and was suddenly the name everyone was saying out loud. She woke up to the sound of reporters outside her tiny apartment building in the Bronx, their voices echoing up the stairwell like thunder. Her mother's old wheelchair ramp creaked as she moved toward the window. Dozens of cameras glinted in the early light. People were shouting her name. She'd never seen her name on anything before, not on a trophy, not on a certificate, not even on a mailbox. Now it was plastered across skyscrapers. Earl Jenkins had been up all night too. He sat at his kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, the newspaper spread out in front of him. The bold black letters made his rough hands tremble. He smiled softly. "Guess the world finally caught up, kid," he whispered. But not everyone was celebrating. Inside the shimmering glass tower of Helios Capital, Daniel Cross stood in his office, the city stretching out beneath him like a kingdom slipping from his grasp. The morning news played silently on the wall-mounted screen behind him, Maya's photo glowing beside the headline. His reflection in the window looked like a ghost. He clenched his jaw. His empire had been humiliated, not by a rival firm, not by a hostile takeover, but by a teenage girl who didn't even own a proper computer. His investors were demanding answers. His board was whispering about Claire Monroe taking his position, and the press wanted him to thank Maya publicly. He turned from the glass, his voice cold and venomous. "She doesn't know what she's done," he hissed. His assistant hesitated near the doorway. "Sir, the press—" "Get me the Titan Biotech files," he snapped. "All of them. And pull her background. I want to know everything about Maya Thompson, where she lives, who she talks to, what she's worth. Every detail." His tone wasn't admiration. It was vengeance. Meanwhile, across the city, Maya sat nervously beside Earl in the break room of a local news station. Producers rushed past, phones ringing, lights flashing, the chaos of fame crashing down like a wave. A young reporter with perfect hair crouched beside Maya's chair, smiling brightly. "Can I call you the girl who saved Wall Street?" Maya blinked, unsure how to answer. "I didn't save Wall Street," she said softly. "I just fixed a math problem." Earl chuckled under his breath. "You fixed a whole lot more than that, kid." When the cameras rolled, the questions came rapid fire. How she'd learned to calculate so fast, whether she'd always been gifted, whether she'd work for Helios someday. Maya answered honestly, shyly, clutching her tablet the entire time like a shield. "I just see things in numbers," she said. "They make sense when people don't." The interview went viral within hours, but the fame didn't feel like sunlight. It felt like a spotlight, too bright, too heavy, impossible to escape. By nightfall, Maya's social media accounts had been hacked. Fake profiles appeared in her name. Anonymous emails flooded in, some calling her a genius, others calling her a fraud. And beneath all the praise, something darker began to surface. Helios's PR team released a short statement. "We commend young Maya Thompson for her contribution. However, our audit shows the error originated from a third-party software glitch. No individual bears full credit." The words hit Maya like ice water. They were erasing her, already rewriting the story. Earl slammed his fist on the table when he saw the release. "Those snakes," he muttered. "They're stealing your moment." Claire Monroe saw it too. From her corner office, she read the press memo and felt her stomach twist. She knew Daniel had written it. She also knew what it meant. He wasn't finished. That night, Claire called Maya from a private number. "Don't meet with anyone from Helios," she warned. "Not until I get there." "Daniel Cross is planning something?" "What kind of something?" Maya asked quietly. "The kind that makes heroes disappear." The next morning, rain fell again. The storm had returned. A black car idled near Maya's apartment building. Inside, Daniel Cross sat in the back seat, his cold blue eyes fixed on the front door. "She's just a girl," his driver murmured. Daniel didn't respond. He simply said, "Everyone's just a someone until they become a threat." In a glass penthouse across the city, Claire Monroe stood at her window, staring down at the streets below. She had always believed numbers were clean, objective, incorruptible. But now she saw what power did to them, and to people. She turned to her computer, opening a new file titled Project Lumen. Inside it, she began documenting every transaction Helios Capital had buried under Daniel's leadership. The deeper she went, the darker it became. Shell companies, hidden losses, doctored statements, and one recurring pattern in the code that made her blood run cold. The same recursion error Maya had spotted in the meeting had been deliberately embedded years ago to conceal fraud. Claire sat back slowly, her breath shaking. Maya hadn't just saved Helios from losing money. She had exposed the cover-up Daniel had spent a decade hiding, and he would do anything, to stop her from realizing it. At that same hour, Maya sat in her small bedroom, the glow from her tablet flickering across her tired face. Outside, sirens wailed faintly. Her inbox pinged with a new message, no sender, no subject. Just one line. "Numbers can save you, Maya, but they can also bury you." She stared at it, her heart pounding. Somewhere in the distance, lightning flashed over the skyline. The world had noticed her, and now, so had the darkness that ruled it. The morning after the anonymous message, the city was wrapped in a mist so thick it swallowed the skyline. From her small bedroom window, Maya could barely see the rooftops across the alley. She hadn't slept. The glowing words, "Numbers can save you. Maya, but they can also bury you," kept looping in her mind. She opened her tablet again, scrolling through lines of code she had written to comfort herself. But nothing made sense anymore. The world she'd known, Numbers, logic, patterns had started to blur with the chaos outside it. She thought the meeting at Helios had ended with applause and gratitude. Instead, it had opened a door she wasn't sure she wanted to walk through. A knock came at the door, sharp, deliberate. "Mr. Jenkins?" she called. "It's me," Claire's voice answered. Maya rolled to the door and unlocked it. Claire Monroe stood there, rain dripping from her hair, her trench coat darkened by the storm. She looked different, no longer the composed executive who had defended her in that glossy boardroom. There was urgency in her eyes and fear she didn't bother to hide. "We have to go," Claire said. "Now." Earl appeared from the kitchen holding a mug. "What's going on?" "They're scrubbing the files," Claire said. "Daniel Cross ordered a total purge at Helios this morning. All project data, all communications. He's covering tracks, and the people who helped him don't know what they're deleting." Maya's throat tightened. "You mean the files I worked on?" "I mean everything you touched," Claire said. "He's trying to erase you from the company's history." Earl set down his mug. "You mean to tell me that Snake's erasing the kid who saved his company?" "Worse," Claire said, looking out the rain-streaked window. "He's erasing the fraud she accidentally uncovered." Maya felt the air leave her lungs. "Fraud?" Claire nodded grimly. "The algorithm you fixed wasn't a mistake. It was a mask. Daniel had been using it to hide losses for years. Your correction exposed the hole he'd buried. Lightning split the sky outside, lighting the room in cold white flashes." Maya's voice trembled. "He's going to blame me." Claire didn't answer. The silence said enough. They left through the back staircase, rain drenching them before they reached the car Claire had waiting on the curb. As they pulled into traffic, sirens wailed somewhere downtown. Helios Tower loomed above the city like a blade of glass cutting into the clouds. "Where are we going?" Maya asked. "To the press," Claire said. "I've got the files he's trying to destroy. The real ones, the backup logs, the financial chains. Once we show them, he can't bury the truth." Earl gripped the steering wheel. "That man's gonna come after you both." Claire looked straight ahead. "He already is." Across town, Daniel Cross watched the rain streak down his window like veins of mercury. His office was dark, lit only by the glow of his monitor. On the screen, a private investigator's report scrolled by. Maya Thompson. No parents, no legal guardian, no financial backing. Vulnerable. He smiled thinly. Perfect. He pressed a button on his desk phone. Activate the non-disclosure orders. Every employee. Anyone leaks data, they're finished. And find the girl. "Sir?" His assistant hesitated. "The media's calling her a hero." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then it's time we make her a villain." The city blurred past the car windows as Claire's phone buzzed nonstop. Reporters, lawyers, colleagues. The world wanted interviews, answers, headlines. But Maya wasn't thinking about fame anymore. She stared at the raindrops racing down the glass, feeling small and powerless again. "I didn't mean to start all this," she whispered. "I just wanted to help." Claire glanced at her. "That's what all revolutionaries say before they realize they've changed the world." Maya smiled faintly. "Revolutionary? You took on $1 billion lie and told the truth," Claire said. "That makes you one." Earl laughed softly from the driver's seat. "She's right, kid. You're one hell of a bus passenger." The car rounded a corner and stopped dead. A black SUV blocked the road. Another slid in behind them. Claire's pulse spiked. "Stay down." Men in dark suits stepped out, umbrellas snapping open against the rain. They didn't look like reporters. Earl's hands tightened on the wheel. "They're not here for an autograph, are they?" Before Claire could answer, the SUV in front reversed, forcing them into an alley. The windows fogged with rain and tension. Then a voice came through Claire's phone speaker. It was Daniel. Calm, smooth, cold. "You really should have stayed quiet, Claire. You, the bus driver, and the little genius. You're all trespassing in a world that doesn't forgive curiosity." Claire hit the speaker button. "You built your empire on lies, Daniel." He laughed softly. "Empires are built on what people believe, not what's true." Maya lifted her tablet. "Then let's show them the truth." Before Daniel could respond, she hit send to every screen in Helios Capital, every news feed. Every monitor in the financial district blinked to black, then came alive with numbers. The files Claire had salvaged burst onto the public web. Hidden accounts, secret transfers, forged data trails. And at the center of it all, one phrase appeared in bold white letters. calculated by Maya Thompson. In the chaos that followed, Helios Capital collapsed under its own weight. Daniel Cross was arrested before midnight, his empire crumbling live on television. Claire Monroe resigned the next morning, handing over every remaining document to investigators. But the story that echoed around the world wasn't his fall, it was hers. The girl who had once been ignored on a rainy bus, Root became a symbol of truth in a world built on deception. Maya Thompson didn't vanish into wealth or fame. She stayed in her small apartment, still coding, still solving puzzles. Sometimes she rode Earl's bus again just to feel the city breathe. And on the first clear morning after weeks of storms, Claire found her sitting by the window, sunlight spilling across her lap. "They're naming the new scholarship after you," Claire said. "The Helios Foundation for Truth and Technology." Maya looked out at the city she'd unknowingly changed. "I didn't do it for that," she said. "I just fixed a mistake," Claire smiled. "And that's how the world gets fixed too, one mistake at a time." Outside, the buses rolled through the streets, engines humming like a heartbeat beneath the reborn city. And somewhere in the reflection of a passing window, the girl who once watched silently from the shadows finally saw herself, not invisible, not forgotten, but seen. The forgotten passenger had become the compass that pointed an empire toward its reckoning, and this time, the world was watching.